You all for getting up and out of bed on this kind of cold and wet, blustery day. I was thinking about a 30% no-show rate this morning, but you guys amazed me. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to introduce a couple of people before we get started. Heather Morrow is in the back, and she is our marketing kind of guru for like the whole St. Francis or the Laureate system. And she brought some of these fancy little silver mugs, and she said you could all have one if you want. And so they're back there on the back table.
So maybe haul them back to the closet.
Yes, please take one or two for your. But I'm drinking out of one just, and it says Laureate Psychiatric Clinical Hospital. I hope the reflection doesn't mess you up. A couple other people I wanted to acknowledge was, some of you know Steve Phelps. He spoke a few years ago. He is the supervisor for the intensive outpatient programs that we have across the way. They have a mental health IOP that goes about 9 to noon. 9 to noon, but it goes like 5 weeks.
20 sessions. Yeah.
20 sessions, and that's 4 days a week. And my Bible app just told me to read my verse of the day. I'll ignore that. But Steve is here just to provide a little moral support, and then he's going to head back over. But clinical, like mental health issues, but also chemical dependency, one of the best ways to treat that is over a period of time in an outpatient setting and Steve oversees that area. That's the topic that he spoke to us on a few years ago, and he's just recently, he thought he was going to retire, and we talked him to coming back in and heading up that department. So if you've got folks that have chemical dependency, they have free assessments every morning, Monday through Thursday, right at 8:30. If people need a chemical dependency assessment, if there's a possibility they may need treatment, Steve's group can handle that for you. And the other person I wanted to acknowledge was Alan Gates. And Alan Gates is the gentleman back there with the white hair. It stands out. Alan is the person who talked me into stepping into this position. I had no intention of going back into an administrative role, but Alan is very convincing, and he's been at Laureate a few years longer than I have, which is, what do you got, close to 28, 29 years? Yeah, I'm following up with 27 next week. So, yeah. So anyway, I wanted to acknowledge those folks. And Alan said that some of you signed up for tours, and if you're averse to the weather and if it's raining and blustery and you want to do it some other day, Alan said he would give you his card and he'd arrange to do that for you. He'd like to see what the inpatient units look like and where and that sort of thing. But if the weather's conducive, we'll go ahead and do that for the 7 or so of you that signed up. Okay, let's get started. Yeah. Am I supposed to be wearing one of these?
Oh, yes, sir. Whichever one you arrange for, because we got to hear you on that tape.
I don't know if this is going to help at all. Testing 1, 2. Are you hearing me better with this on than with it off? Are you hearing me better with it off? Okay. We got great acoustics in here, and I'm not going to mess with that. All right. All right, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to distinguish between normal anxiety and anxiety disorders, provide an understanding of why anxiety might be on the increase, review different types of anxiety and how they present in ministry, and maybe provide some insights that might be helpful for you guys in reaching out to people that God's put under your purview. I just like this quote. It's actually 2 quotes that I've merged together. Peace lies on the other side of panic. When we're dealing with anxiety, our natural intention, everything about us wants to avoid that terrible feeling that anxiety has. But the thing that's unnatural about it is that the more we avoid it, the worse it gets. And the only way through anxiety, the only way to get to peace is to face those fearful things and everything in your body, everything in your mind is telling you, no, you've got to avoid, you've got to protect yourself from that. But the only way past is through it. And I like Psalm 23. That just came to me. This is that God doesn't bring us to that kind of banqueting feast on the other side without taking us through a valley of the shadow of death that is really, I mean, when you think about that, that's got to be a really scary place. Some of the most courageous people I know on the planet are people that deal with anxiety disorders. If you've ever had a panic attack, if you've ever had overwhelming anxiety, you know how difficult that is to face whatever it is your fear is. It is the scariest thing, and it's really a natural, it's something that God put within us to protect us from a danger, and it's just something that's gotten a little bit out of whack. But anyway, that's a premise. Did you know this? And you guys have this on your slides, but this is the most common of all mental illnesses. Depression comes right up behind it, and anxiety disorders, if we lump them all together, there are several. They affect like 40 million adults. And kids get anxious too, but 40 million, 18%. That's like one in five folks that you're going to run into on any given day, or in your congregations, or the people that you come across will have some kind of anxiety disorder today. They're highly treatable. But about a third of folks get appropriate treatment. A lot of people suffer with this, and they suffer in shame because they think that they should be able to handle this, or that their faith should be able to, if they just believed enough, if they just quoted the right kinds of scriptures, if they trusted God enough, then they wouldn't experience this kind of debilitating anxiety. But it is an illness. It isn't just an issue of faith. This is like the #1 reason people show up at St. Francis in the cardiac or in the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack. Anxiety disorders mimic that, those heart attack features, and it's really, really scary. People think they're going to die. So you're 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders too, because it's like it can feel so overwhelming. And why? Why do we have it? It's a complex set of things. There isn't just one reason why people have anxiety disorders. Sometimes it's because of genetics. It tends to run more frequently in family members. Now, that isn't just family members that are teaching their kids to be anxious about certain things, because if you take kids that were raised in a different family, you know, they have a similar increased likelihood, even if they're raised in a different setting. But if you do have an anxious parent, we do have the ability to model some things that things are scary, and so that can set us up. Brain chemistry is obviously involved for a lot of folks. For some folks, it's causative. There's something in our brain chemistry that makes us more susceptible to anxiety. And for some folks, for everybody who experiences anxiety, anxiety is one of the most fatiguing things a person can experience. It's like when you're dealing with that anxiety, it's like you're running a marathon every day. It's exhausting. But it's also not only physically exhausting, it's mentally depleting. And so you're much more likely to show other symptoms, not only symptoms related to like depression. If you're anxious enough, your brain's going to get depleted, you're likely to get depressed. About 2/3 of people with depression also have issues with anxiety. So it's a very depleting event on the brain. Okay, let's just talk real briefly about some of the kinds of anxiety disorders that show up. This is the most common form of anxiety, but it's, well actually if you call, like, we're going to get to specific phobia, but that's like a whole bunch of different things. That's the most common diagnosed disorder, but this is the one that most folks with anxiety have. And this is just characterized by that persistent and excessive worry about things that maybe would be normal for other folks, but it's just kind of over the top, and I don't know what I did. Something that just went down, and I'll get back. So I'm not going to touch that. I'm gonna. People with generalized anxiety just worry more about things that most of us wouldn't. It's like over the top. Most of us are going to get anxious about like public speaking, like getting in front of it. That next to death, getting up and doing this is like the next most feared thing for most people on the planet. And but that doesn't mean that you have an anxiety disorder if you have anxiety about certain things. Let's just run through something real quick. If you worry about paying bills, landing a job, relationship breakup, or other important events, is that an anxiety disorder?
No.
That's kind of normal stuff, right? But if it's constant and unsubstantiated worry, causes significant distress, it interferes with your daily life, and it lasts for like 6 months, that's an anxiety disorder. See how they're embarrassment or self-consciousness in an uncomfortable or awkward social situation. Most of us experience that if we're healthy. But avoiding social situations for fear of being judged or embarrassed or humiliated, and so it interferes with your ability to interact with folks. That's probably more likely an anxiety disorder. What about a case of nerves or sweating before a big test, or doing a presentation at your business? Some big significant event where you're not used to being up in front of people or having to present. That's kind of a normal thing, right? But if you have just kind of out of the blue, just an overwhelming physiological panic where it feels like you can't breathe and you can't get up out of your chair, and that's an anxiety disorder. If you are afraid as you venture out across a 6-lane kind of highway, and you're trying to get across that, and your heart's increased a little bit, that might be a healthy thing. But if somebody, you're heading out to the parking lot and somebody pulls a gun and says, "Give me your wallet," it would be okay for your heart to race a little bit. And if it didn't, there might be something wrong. But if you have an irrational fear about an object, or it might be like a little puppy, a little chihuahua. They're the scariest of the dogs, by the way. Chihuahuas scare me. Big Rottweilers, I love those. But those chihuahuas, they're the meanest little things. But I don't have an irrational fear. I don't approach them quickly. I'm very careful with chihuahuas. Okay, so you see that was one of my objectives. How do you distinguish between the two? So this is generalized anxiety disorder. Panic disorder. This is like the first time somebody has one of these, it's one of the scariest experiences you can have on the planet. Everything in your body is in that fight or flight stage, and you don't know why. What's going on with me? Sometimes people wake up and they don't know. Did I have a dream? What's happening with me? And so with this, all of your body is full of adrenaline. You're in this fight or flight mode. Your heart is racing. And you don't know why. And what a lot of times happens is that if you're in a grocery store when that happens the first time, or if you're sitting in the middle aisle of, in the middle row at church, and that happens, and all of a sudden you feel like, I've got to get out of here. I'm gonna pass out, or I'm gonna have a heart attack, and when that happens, you're really anxious about going into that setting again. So panic disorder will eventually get you to avoid situations where that might happen again. social anxiety disorder, they also call it social phobia, is because that's, and this one's really interesting, it's the fear of being judged or negatively evaluated, rejected, you know, on some kind of performance. And it can be anxious about looking anxious. What if I blush? What if people see me stumbling over my words? But for some folks, it's like talking on the telephone. I can't get my words, and it's going to be terrible. Or some people, it's graphophobia. I'm afraid to write in public. They wouldn't be able to go over that whiteboard and just scribble because they would, for something in their brain tells them that that's something dangerous. You're going to be humiliated. People are going to think that you're weird, and so they avoid social or performance situations. So that's called social phobia. And what's debilitating about that is a lot of times it limits them. Like I've had clients that wanted to be married, but to think about going on a date with someone was so debilitating that they couldn't even imagine. It was so scary, and so it limited their life. Agoraphobia, this word goes back to the early Greeks. Tony would know this because he travels to the early church sites throughout Corinth and Philippi and all of that. But the agora was what? It was the marketplace. And the early Greeks noticed that sometimes in that marketplace where everybody's crowded all around you and you're trying to get to your little place to buy your food or trinkets or whatever, and people are pressing in from all sides, people would have like a panic attack in that setting. And so they called it the fear of the agora, the marketplace. But it really is any place where it would be difficult or embarrassing to escape. You know, like, and so people with this, if they do go to church, they're the ones who always sit on the end of the aisle, or if they go to a movie, it's at the very end of the aisle. Don't ever put me in the middle. The anxiety starts to flare up. Then, so where it's going to be difficult or it's going to be embarrassing, people are going to notice me getting up, and so they're going to sit toward the back and they're going to be avoiding. A lot of times when it gets to the worst case scenarios, they're afraid to go anywhere because their anxiety, the panic is going to show up again. And then specific phobias. We've all heard of like arachnophobia, right? Spiders. I had a client who I couldn't even say the word spiders without having this visceral response. And so this time of year with people in their decorations out front, they've got spiders and whatever. It's traumatic for her, you know. But this is an irrational fear. This is an over-the-top fear. So it could be, you can see a variety of them. People have fear of flying. People have heights. A lot of people have fear of storms. And some of that's like normal, right? We got Tornado Alley here. We've got, but an irrational, over-the-top type of fear of storms. Bugs, needles. A lot of people don't like getting shots, but some folks, they can't, even just seeing a needle or thinking about being injected is very, very debilitating. Elevators, and it isn't just in closed spaces, because some people, well, it's claustrophobia if I get in an elevator. Well, not necessarily. Claustrophobia, afraid of enclosed spaces, but sometimes it's anxiety. Going over a bridge. What is it that's scary going over a bridge? Well, it's high, could be combined with heights, but it's also, what if my car breaks down here, and how would I get off the bridge? So some people have a fear of, like, I'm going to get sick and then I'm going to throw up and people are going to, and it's going to come back on. So these are specific phobias. These are the most common, but they're so broad and there's so many different kinds. But it's an irrational, unreasonable, and and a lot of times they can tell you, I know this is over the top, but they can't fix it. Let's just look at this. This was Alan's slide. I changed it a little bit, but is anxiety increasing? The thing is, God made our brains to to embrace predictability. Anytime we're in a new situation, we are checking it out, we're looking for a way to make sense out of it. And if we can't, we're going to start having problems. But there's a good reason. I mean, if we can get into, most of us didn't think about this morning when we got up and got dressed, we didn't have to think about buttoning our shirt or our blouse. We didn't have to think about where do we put the key or how do we put the car in drive. We didn't think about any of that stuff. It's autopilot. We don't have to think. God made our brains to do things very efficiently, and once we've done them a few times, then they become habit. We don't have, the automatic part of our brain is kind of driving in that situation. Most of you probably don't have a clear memory of all the turns and such that you made getting here this morning, probably until you got here and you think, okay, where do I park? And then your brain, your conscious brain is like going, okay, and how do I find this place? And you can remember that. But the other stuff, we like being able to do things on autopilot. It's much more energy efficient. A lot of times when we go on vacation, we come back more tired. Part of the reason is everything's new, everything's different. We're not sleeping in our bed. We don't know where we're going to eat. Our brain is always on a lot when we're traveling. Let's talk about, could anxiety be on the increase? Let's just reflect a little bit on the last year and a half. Has there been any unpredictable change or any changes that have been difficult? What kinds of changes do you think have maybe affected the level of anxiety people might be experiencing? Bill, what do you think?
COVID, politics, division.
Yeah, there you go.
Just for starters.
Just for starters, yeah.
And that can be built out. So, you know, with politics, we've never been more divided. If we want to start a fight, just say who you voted for last November, and somebody's going to dislike you, and somebody's going to love you, and but there's divisiveness around it. But what about these guys? You know, this is something that we wear.
Oxygen deprivation because of the masks.
The perception of oxygen, I'm not getting enough air.
Yeah.
And there are folks that really couldn't wear these because of their anxiety or because of their asthma, because it was like, I can't breathe with this on. But masks and all the news, and we didn't know whether 30% of the people in our country were going to die or not, and the news keeps changing. That unpredictability is when our prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain that is meant to make sense out of things, when it doesn't have enough information to accurately predict, it starts being a little bit more hypervigilant. And not knowing what to expect puts us on edge. I talk with my clients about if you have a little bit of a predisposition toward anxiety, then the novel, the new, the unpredictable, that's like your kryptonite. Everybody knows Superman, right? That's the thing that is your undoing. And it's like a lot of folks, we notice things that are different, but we don't have this kind of feeling that comes with it. It's like this is somehow dangerous. This is potentially this is unsettling. If there's something that I don't recognize, or something that's changed, or you said you were going to be here at this time, but you're not here. Now this is an anxious situation for me. If the unknown, the unpredictable, so in our world today, there's just so much of it. So anxiety numbers are on the increase. In one study, this is from a book on anxiety by Jeff Brewer, who wrote Untwisting Anxiety. But he just said that the main point was here is that in 2018, about less than 4% reported that they were having severe psychological distress. And in April of 2020, just a month or so into the pandemic, that had gone up 250%, like severe distress. And I don't know where it would be today, but I don't think it would be lower. And this is just an extra piece here. It isn't the fear itself that measures anxiety. Fear is a normal response that God gave us to protect us from danger. Now, my wife struggled over this. She read this. She said, well, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. I said, no, that's not exactly the same thing either. But she says, I don't think, we maybe should change that. And I said, well, we probably just need to define it. You know, is that fear is a natural, God gave us, not a spirit of fear, but he gave us this uneasiness when we're in a situation that could cause danger. And that's for our protection. We're supposed to pay attention to the things that could harm us. And if we don't, we're not going to live very long. So, anxiety is not helpful. It's maladaptive. Now, there is some study, like if I would probably do better, the more if I have a little bit of anxiety doing this, I'm going to have a little bit of, just a little bit of adrenaline that kind of keeps me alert, my brain functioning and whatever. If I'm too relaxed, I might not perform at my best. Any athlete, any performer, they get a little bit of gurgliness in their stomach or whatever. That isn't bad, that's not dangerous, that's normal. But when it spins out of control, then that's depleting. Okay, so here's some ways that we might look at this. So if you think about this, if you have a congregation or if you have a group of people that you meet, there's a great likelihood that somebody at some point experiences some debilitating anxiety. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to promote the idea that there's something like wrong with them. The anxiety, they didn't cause this by some sin in their life, or they didn't cause this because they didn't have enough faith. This is an illness that's kind of an equal opportunity attacker. It can attack anybody, any family, and certain situations may trigger a change in the way the brain processes information. But be sensitive and be careful about giving kind of pat answers to, like, you know, well, if you would, you just need to pray more about this. You need to quote these scriptures. You know, we need to rightly divide the word of truth when it comes to doing this. But one of the first things I always encourage folks to know is understand how this works. How do your emotions work? Where do they come from? They're actually very logical. No matter what a person is experiencing, no matter what the emotion is, even if I'm over on the psychiatric unit across the way here, and that person believes that there are bugs crawling under their skin, and they're like really anxious or agitated, I'm not going to argue with them about whether there are bugs under their skin. I'm going to start with acknowledging how scary that must be for them. Because feelings always make sense. Feelings are very, very logical. Now, how many have heard that preached before? Now, you don't have to trust your feelings necessarily, but your feelings always make sense. And if it's anxiety, it makes sense. There's a reason why it's happening. And so I usually give folks just a really quick, where do our feelings come from? Well, what are we believing? What are our past experiences taught us? So in any situation, I think I've got a slide here. Yes. ABCs, the ABCs of how emotions work. There's some kind of activating event, something that happens, and from there, our brain makes sense out of it. We have an automatic thought or an automatic belief that tells us something that that's the part of our brain making sense out of it. And depending on what we're telling ourselves, there's a consequence. There's an emotional piece. It may be anxiety, it may be depression, it may be anger. But there's also a physiological piece. When we feel something, it's measurable in our body. It can be with heart rate, it can be with galvanic skin response, the little micro beads of sweat that come to our fingertips when we're under duress. Something happens in our body when we experience an emotion. And so the part of our brain that God gave us to protect us from danger isn't necessarily this later part. This is the part of our brain, I do it up here because it's the outer lining of the two frontal lobes. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part, a lot of times I like to think, is that's the part that's kind of made in the image of God. That part of our brain has the ability to reason, to use logic, to think into the future, to be creative, and to imagine something that hasn't even happened yet. it has, and part of that creativity is like we can envision something in our minds that doesn't exist yet. And that's kind of like what God did in creation, right? He called things into existence. Well, that's part of how we're made in His image. But one of the things that can happen is that that creative process can also create scenarios, kind of what if scenarios that generate real anxiety. What if I get up in front of people and I lose my train of thought and I can't remember what I'm going to say? What? Feel a little bit of anxiety about that. What if I do that and I'm going to look foolish and people are going to think that I'm dumb or I'm an imposter or something? Well, more anxiety. Whatever I'm telling myself is going to determine what I'm feeling. Now there's another component, and that's the part of our brain that God put in there to protect us that is so lightning quick that this part of our brain doesn't have to get involved with. The part that if I'm walking here and out of my peripheral vision I see something, it may be a stick but it looks like a snake, I'm going to step back from it before I even know that that's what that was. Sometimes I'll wad up a piece of Kleenex and I'll be talking to a client and I'll just throw it at them and they will duck. I said, you ducked before you knew what that was because God put that in there to protect you from potential danger. That you didn't know, was that just a Kleenex or was he throwing a rock or should I get another therapist? That part of our brain responds lightning quick before we even know what's happening. And that's the part that responds to anxiety. That part of our brain is perceiving certain things as potentially dangerous. And if we believe that that's dangerous, then if we don't have an anxious response, then there's something wrong with the way our brains are functioning. Is this making sense? You can follow me? So what I want people to understand is don't be concerned about the emotional response. Don't feel guilty about that. Let's take a step back and say, what is my brain telling me right now? What am I believing about this? And then we can step back, and this is kind of the foundations of cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive therapy at this point, that let's understand what is it that I'm believing that might be causing this anxious response. A lot of times people feel guilty, like I alluded to earlier. They feel like, well, I should be able to trust the Lord. I should not be anxious about anything. And they take certain scriptures and they say, well, if I really believe this, then I wouldn't have this anxiety disorder. And I don't believe that that scripture was directed just at people with anxiety disorders. I think it's for all of us, and that what we want to be able to do is, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but what we want to be able to do is recognize what is it that we're believing, that this is a real illness. Let's not beat ourselves up because we do have an anxious response that other people wouldn't feel anxious about. That's because there's something in the brain that's causing that. And what we can go back and we can say, what is it that I'm believing about this? And so that's the kind of the foundation of that. We want to normalize these sensations. I went back a slide. That was how emotions work, normalizing sensations. Because if you don't know what's going on in your body, it's going to scare the fire out of you. It's really scary. And learn how to ride those out. The thought challenging may fit back under CBT. Engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, that's the part of our, and then maybe some faith applications. That's where we're headed in the time that we had. Okay. One of the things we want to do with folks who are experiencing this upheaval in their body is to let them know that this really makes sense. Your body's responding to this like there really is a danger. And each one of those things that you're experiencing has a purpose. But if we get afraid of what's happening, because like if somebody, if you're facing a real danger, if you are walking down the street and a snarling Rottweiler is like pushing up against the fence and they jump over the fence, what's going to happen in your body? Are you going to have a physiological response?
Yes.
And what are you going to do? I want to get out of there. And God made this adrenaline reaction to help you escape that situation. If you're attacked, or your child is pinned under something heavy, you may have supernatural strength in that moment to help them because of what God put in your body to protect. And so one of the things I like to tell folks is, and I don't know how readable this is on your slide, when your brain perceives a threat, there's this adrenaline, instantaneous. You don't get to choose this. This is like you ducking from the Kleenex that's being thrown at you. You don't think about, oh, do I need to duck? Some people that are into sports, I say, what do you think happens with the person who goes into a batting slump? Or what do you think happens when an infielder who's had 60 games without an error, and they get a ball hit to them and it bounces, in a way that they mess it up? They are so many times more likely to have another error in that same game than they make, because instead of them just doing what their body's been trained to do, if they have to think about what they're doing, it slows their reaction time just a millisecond, and that's too much when if you're trying to hit a pitch that's coming at you 100 miles an hour, you have to make that decision way back there, a fraction of a second, and if you are thinking about, oh, I gotta hit it this way, or I've gotta look, too late. I've now slowed my reflexes down just enough to mess up my batting average. There's an automatic response. If we get our thinking in the way, God intended us for not to have to figure all of that out in that millisecond. First, it's avoid the danger, protect yourself, then make sense out of it. And so we have that fight or flight response, and all these things happen. This is what people get so scared about with a panic attack or the surge of anxiety, because what's happening? They say, I can't, my mouth is so dry, or my stomach feels like I'm going to throw up, or I feel like I got this tightness in my stomach. I'm sweating, profusely sweating. What's going on? All these things make sense. A lot of times they talk about, I think my vision is blurry. What's happening to me? Well, when you're in danger, your pupils dilate to get more light and be able to see things, everything that's going on to protect you from danger. When mouth dries out because there's a narrowing of some of the blood vessels where you don't need them there, you need to be able to protect yourself. So the sweating, that's what's going to cool your body. That's what's going to help, because if you're running for your life or fighting for your life, you can easily get overheated. Your heart beating faster. They feel like their heart is pounding. What's it doing? It's getting the blood to where it needs to go so that you can run or fight, save your life. A lot of times they talk about jelly legs, or they feel like they're tingling. There's something going on. And there's multiple reasons for that, but blood is diverted to your arms and your legs so that you can run faster than you could normally run, or fight harder. And but that feels different. See, if you're running from that Rottweiler, you're not thinking about how fast you're breathing. You're not thinking about how fast your heart is pumping. You're not thinking about your sweating. You're not thinking of, because all those things are functional, and you're just trying to get away. But if you're sitting in class, or you're sitting getting ready to, speak before a group, and all of a sudden those things start happening, it's very scary. What is happening? Well, it's just your alarm system has gone off. It's a little bit more sensitive than it needs to be. Sometimes people feel like they've got an urge to go to the bathroom, or some rare circumstances, they may lose control of their bowels, because that's not necessary. I don't need to be digesting food right now. I need to get the blood flow to where I need to for my protection. Muscles tense up. They're ready to fight. That stomach, breathing rapidly. You're going to breathe shallow and rapid, not slow, because you got to get those breaths. If you're running around the track and you're trying to carry on a conversation, you can't do it very well because you're breathing quickly, fast. You're getting oxygen to your muscles. So, and feeling dizzy and lightheaded. If you're not expending that energy, if you're not running and fighting and whatever, you're going to hyperventilate. You're going to get too much oxygen. And what's crazy is that when you get too much oxygen, it feels exactly the same as you're not getting enough oxygen. Anybody ever have that experience? I had it a few years ago when I started going over to the health zone to swim at lunchtime. And I used to swim and be a lifeguard, and I used to swim for exercise. And so when I was young, you swim, you take a breath every 4 strokes. You just take a little gulp of air and you breathe it out slowly. And so you're rhythmic, it's very relaxing. And so I jump in the pool, I go down, I swim a length there and back. And after a little bit, now I need a little bit more oxygen. I need to do more than every 4th stroke. But I realized is, you know, those years of wrestling or whatever injuries, my head doesn't turn good well this way. And so I'm having trouble breathing out this side. And so I said, well, I'll just keep breathing out every 2nd stroke. And after going down and back, all of a sudden I feel like I am exhausted. I can't, how am I so out of breath? I've only like swim. This is crazy. Got to push through, because when you don't listen to your body, you got to push. And the more I did that, I stood up in a panic. It's like, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And that was my enlightened moment with hyperventilation. I was breathing more than I needed to because I couldn't turn my head to the left and breathe every 3rd stroke. And so when we're in an anxious situation, we're not expending that energy. We breathe faster than we need to because we're perceiving danger and our body's supposed to be doing it. And then we start to have these symptoms. And then the tingliness with that, the dizziness, you know, the lightheadedness, and that sensation, I can't breathe. And it's so scary when you can't breathe. We could do a little experiment here and have everybody hold your breath and see what you start to feel like after about a minute or so. And, but when we explain this to somebody, they go, oh, that's what's happening. That makes sense. Somebody I had used to have to travel back and forth to Oklahoma City along the highway, and they were great and everything, and then they had this fear of, what if I were to have a heart attack and I'm so far, and how would I get help, and had a panic attack. And then after that, it was like he would be like white knuckling it and just so afraid and saying, what's the matter with me? He had a panic attack and he had this irrational fear, but his body was telling him. So when I explained, this is your body's just has perceived that as a danger, and now you're afraid of having another one of those panic attacks, and that might cause a heart attack and whatever else. So let's take this back to, this is a normal response when your alarm system's a little bit too sensitive. Most of us have alarm systems in our cars now, or in our houses even. And there are times when that alarm goes off. Here's my favorite. How about the one in your kitchen or close to your, don't have it in your kitchen, have it close to your kitchen, right? Why don't we have it like in our kitchen? It goes off. Those are very sensitive. There's some even in here. Somebody lights up, that we're gonna get wet. Because it's very sensitive to any particulate matter in the air. A little bit of smoke is going to cause that alarm to go off. In the kitchen, ours is like outside the kitchen, but it's on just close enough so that if there's some toast in there that gets a little bit too dark, the alarm might go off. Or if I'm broiling something in the stove, some of the grease spatters up, I can be in the other room and the alarm goes off. Now, how do I know that the house isn't on fire? I don't until I check, right? Because how do I distinguish between a false alarm and a real fire? How do I know it's not burnt toast and it's not a real fire? Can I tell by the alarm? Is it a little higher pitch if it's really more dangerous? Is it a little louder if it's a real danger? No, it's the same exact thing, and what's it meant to do? An alarm goes off. Sometimes they test them here at Laureate, and it's like, okay, guys, this is unsettling. It's intentionally set at a volume and a pitch that is next to impossible to ignore, and it's kind of unsettling to your nervous system. The noise and the pitch is very annoying. Well, that's what happens in our bodies. That alarm is meant to not be ignored. What if this is a fire? If it's a fire, you need to pay attention to it. So you come in and, oh, it's just burnt toast. Does the alarm stop because you said, oh, it's just burnt toast? It doesn't. It's still going. When our adrenaline system is activated, it's going to take you at least 6 minutes for that to dissipate through your body. That adrenaline's going to kick in, and you're going to feel it. Your heart rate's going to be increased. You're going to feel it. So the alarm is off. It's just burnt toast, or it's still going. Now, I can go up and take the battery out, or I can take my dish towel and wave it, and open a window. I wish we could do that with our brains. We can't, disengage the alarm system. But we do say, oh, okay, this is annoying, but it's not dangerous anymore. That's an important distinction. This is annoying. This is scary, but it's not dangerous. I am not really in danger because that alarm is going off. Now, God gave me that alarm to protect me when there is danger. But with anxiety, the alarm goes off when there isn't a real danger. But if we acknowledge it, okay, that's what's going on. And how do I then respond to that anxiety in a way that helps to bring it back down? Like telling myself this is scary, but it's not dangerous. It's just a few. One of my favorite phrases was from Claire Weeks, a psychiatrist from Australia. She said, this is just a few chemicals temporarily out of balance in my brain. She had terrible anxiety. She said, this isn't dangerous. This is just a few chemicals temporarily out of balance in my brain. Oh, I just like that. So that's what's going on. We have to tell ourselves that when we have anxiety. This is just a few chemicals temporarily out of balance. This will rise, and it's going to peak, and then it's going to go back down, unless we give it another search. Another example I use is that, let's say you're on your way here, and the light turns green. You say, great, I'm starting to go, and then somebody comes blazing through that, and you have to slam on your brakes, and you just, it's this close. Anxiety a lot of times is a disease of this close. It's this close. This could have happened. Well, when that happens, we're going to have this adrenaline surge. And then we may have some anger. We may have some, and as we're thinking these things, and then we go, oh, thank God, I'm okay. I'm safe. Breathe. And then I drive to the next intersection, and 2 blocks down, I stop at the next light, and I see my hands are shaking on the steering wheel, and my heart's still racing. Why is that? Am I still in danger? Am I still afraid? No, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid that the next, but I have my body hasn't processed all of that adrenaline yet, and so it's going to take a little while for that. So I always tell folks, don't be concerned that just because you're telling yourself this isn't dangerous, and it's kind of annoying and it is scary, but it's not dangerous, and this is what's happening, and it isn't. Just because you're cognitively telling yourself, it doesn't mean that your body automatically responds to that. It's going to take a while. So here's a few things to engage and train the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our body that your brain has like 2 alternating bipolar, not the same way, Tim. If one is up, the sympathetic nervous system is up. That's the adrenaline stuff. That's the stuff that keeps you alert and awake and isn't going to let you go to sleep, and it's going to keep you on edge. That's the sympathetic nervous system. When that's high, your parasympathetic is low. Parasympathetic helps you relax, your muscles relax, you be able to go to sleep, for you to feel at ease. When sympathetic is elevated, this one's low. But as this one comes up, this one has to come down. You can't have both of them elevated at the same time. You can't be both relaxed physically, breathing slowly and rhythmically, and feel like you're in this danger. They have to balance each other out. The speaker we had here last week said, it's impossible to feel traumatized in a relaxed body. And I thought that was an interesting thing. If we're not experiencing this heightened threat, our brain isn't going to interpret that as trauma. But with the parasympathetic nervous system, that controls our breathing, our respiration rate, that's the same thing, our heart rate, our digestion, all that's automatic. We don't control that. But there's the one part of our parasympathetic nervous system that we have some control over, and that's our breathing. Now, most of us have been breathing since we came out. Some of us needed something they used to like swat us on the butt or whatever. We've got to do that first gasp. Now we're breathing air. And we've been doing it. We never stopped. We got knocked unconscious on the football field. We keep breathing. God made that automatic. And we breathe faster. If I were to check on what my heart rate is now, I can probably tell you. It's probably, normally I'm right around 60, but I'll let you know here. But if I'm a little bit more excited, it was 92 8 minutes ago. It's 96. That's way higher than I'm normally. Normally, even when I'm seeing clients, I'm in the 60s. When I jumped out of a plane earlier this year, I was in the 70s, with like anticipating that. It's kind of like, I am calm. This is exciting. This is like going to be an adventure. How our brain interprets things. Like my clients that are afraid of flying, they were like, don't even talk about. Don't talk about that. I said, how we interpret something determines how we respond to it. And so I wasn't interpreting that as danger. I was interpreting that as excitement. This is like, roller coasters are fun for some people and they're terrifying for others. Now my thing, I don't like scary movies. I do not like suspenseful movies. I might watch, horror movies never. Nope. I'm not waiting for that. The music and whatever, because I'm activated and I can't do anything about it. I don't like it. But other people, they watch a lot. They're very popular. People like them. Why? They interpret that as exciting. This is like, my heart's racing and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't like that feeling. And I'm not really motivated to change it. I can activate my parasympathetic nervous system. 100. I want to turn that off.
Maybe we're a little more stressful.
I thought about scary movies.
Yeah, it was a scary movie thing. I was thinking about it. So there's some things we can do with breath work. Anybody ever, now it's really popular, deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. Anybody practice that? Great. That is one of the ways that we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Even if we're anxious, if we slow our brain down, or slow our breathing down, it sends a message to the part of our brain that's interpreting danger and says, oh wait, breathing is slow, muscles are relaxed, danger must be over. It's kind of helping to bring that sympathetic back down. So training people to pay attention to their level of stress in their body, that's why I have PMR, progressive muscle relaxation exercises, teach you to pay attention to those sensations in your body. Most of us carry stress in our muscles, we don't even realize it. And progressive muscle relaxation exercises help us tune into that, and it helps us to know and feel what relaxed is. And so when we have that, we can go, oh, relax that set of muscles. We can train ourselves to do that. And once we are aware of that, we can scan our bodies for any tension that's there. There's a grounding technique I'll share with you real quick, and then there's the breathing. There's different types of breathing. Teaching people to breathe down here. If you were a singer or you played a wind instrument, your band teacher taught you in that first year, breathe down here. Because if you breathe up here, your intercostal muscles, your ribs can only expand like this much to get air in. when you breathe here, you can breathe, there's this space in our abdomen where that diaphragm pulls the lungs down, and it gets like 30% more oxygen, and it's all the way down into your lungs where we process that. And so when we breathe, I teach people to put their hand on their pinky in their belly button and the other one up here, and when they breathe, what should happen isn't very ladylike, but this part should not move, but the belly should pooch out. You think like I'm blowing up a balloon, and the balloon is down here. If I breathe down here, that's where I want to slow and rhythmic. And there's some more information on that, but there's a really neat app called the Virtual Hope Box. This was developed for the Department of Defense. All these vets are coming home with PTSD and other anxiety disorders and such. And this is free. There's no advertising that comes in it. They're not keeping track of how many people have downloaded it, so they can sell you stuff, figure out the algorithm for how many times you use these. This is one that I recommend quite a bit. This has got like kind of stuff like just to distract yourself. It's got Sudoku, did I say that right? Sudoku, right? It's got Mahjong tiles that you kind of have to, and it's got word search. There's things like here that you can do. There's, these have got inspirational quotes. Here's some quotes. This is the one that I think is gold. In that, and you can upload some of your relaxing pictures. Mine, if I were to show you, has pictures of my trip to the Boundary Waters with it's my happy place, and that will run in the background while I'm doing my breathing exercise. But it's got a little, like a little bar that goes up and say, breathe in, and then pause, and then breathe out. And it can play music, or it can give you cues. You can add your own music, or their kind of new agey kind of music that's going to calm me. But I really encourage you to check this out. It's a free app. You got a smartphone, and you can practice it. I encourage my clients to practice it at least 3 times a day. Practice getting, so that when you train your body to feel what calm feels like. So that's something I would encourage you. Here's a grounding technique, and this was from Alan's presentation. But if a person's in this panicky state and they're feeling really anxious, you can ask them, let's just pay attention here. Let's sit in this room. Let's look at, are there 5 colors that you can see in this room? And name them. And are there 4 sounds that you can hear? So if we're real quiet. Somebody didn't turn off their phone. So the wind blowing and your, all these things. Now, if you really kind of taste some, you may taste the yogurt left over in your mouth, or some of that delicious sausage quiche. Anyway, something you feel. And then you can do it on the other hand, or you can do it imagined things. Imagine 5 things that are, that you can see, so that's a way of like bringing your conscious brain back down to like, now I'm grounded, now I'm safe, here's where I am. And I use this stop sign. Person starts to feel overwhelmed with anxiety or a fearful thought. Let's stop. It's an acronym. So stop and step back is the S. Pause. I'm not reacting. I'm just, and there's this little, Viktor Frankl said there's this little space, this fraction of a second between some stimulus and our response and that's where our freedom lies. When we recognize, wait a minute, take a breath. Okay, and pay attention to my breathing. That helps to ground me. Starts to activate my parasympathetic system. I'm going to breathe a little bit more slowly. Now, observe, what am I thinking? What am I believing? What are the thoughts that are going through my head right now? And then pull back and let's take a broad view of this. What would a friend say about this? What would my pastor say about this? What's another way of looking at it? What is this just my body reacting to a perceived danger? And really, when I'm thinking about like having to get up and talk in front of a group of people, if I were feeling anxious about it, am I going to be thinking about this in 6 months? Or is it going to be like, okay, let's put it in that kind of perspective. And then practice what works. But in some ways, you look at that and say, how do I want to respond to this? In acceptance and commitment therapy, we may accept the fact that I have an anxiety disorder, my brain does this. It just reacts like this. I've got this reaction to kryptonite, and I'm just going to acknowledge that. But how am I going to respond to that? What am I called to do? What are my values? Am I going to let that control me? Am I going to let that define me? Or am I going to live in relation to my values and what's really important and face these fears? And then there's also, some questions like, is this helpful? What I'm wanting to do here, is this helpful? Is this appropriate? Are these thoughts, are they helping me? Are they not? And we can also practice the cognitive therapy stuff, deep breathing, taking a walk. Faith applications, scriptural meditation. I like stories, reading people's stories. Here's a scripture, we just have so many, but you will keep him in perfect peace, all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. So if we're thinking about, and one of the ways to incorporate God into the breathing process is there's different ways, like contemplative prayer. Tim teaches some things on contemplative prayer, but also, Lectio Divina? Did I say that right? Or did I make it a Lectio? Or?
Both ways are appropriate.
No wonder I don't know. Lectio Divina is a way of like meditating and chewing on pieces of scripture while you're doing that in a relaxed and calm sort of state. A lot of people get into trouble with this one because it's like, don't be anxious about anything. But if you got an anxiety disorder, there's all kinds of things that make you anxious. And it's like, so I should feel guilty. I'm sinning. I'm not being, and like, no, let's not stop. Here's what you do with it. Instead of, you're going to be anxious. Paul earlier, chapter or two earlier, said, I was so anxious when, is it Epaphras or Epaphroditus? Epaphroditus. I got to look at my Bible teacher over here. Epaphroditus almost died. He was so sick. And here's Paul with this great healing ministry, but here's somebody who's not getting well, and he's afraid he's going to die, and he's going to have to tell his early church followers that Epaphroditus was one of their go-to boys, and he was studying under Paul, and he's like, thought he was going to die. And I was so anxious, I didn't want to have to tell you this. But thank God, Paul was talking about anxiety. So it isn't like if you're a Christian, you're not going to experience anxiety. Don't stay here, but take it, acknowledge it with prayer, bring it to God in prayer. With petition, you can make a specific request to God. God encourages us to do that. And then with thanksgiving, you practice that gratitude, the knowledge that God hears my prayers, whether I'm seeing them answered or not. He's with me. I'm going to present those requests to God in the context of thanksgiving and gratitude and the awareness that He's there. And the peace of God that transcends what? Our understanding. Some of that up here, it's not making sense. Why is this happening? We're trying to understand why it's happening. But that transcendence, the peace of God, guards our hearts and minds. And then finally, let's direct our thoughts. Let's direct our thoughts to things that are true and lovely and excellent and worthy of praise. So, I like this quote, and I'll kind of end with that. Anxiety is anticipating the future without God in it. And when a person, one of the I alluded to earlier, our ability, the way that God made us in His image, He gave us the ability to imagine something that hasn't existed yet, may never exist, but that creative ability, we all know that God's like omnipresent, right? He's everywhere. David said that even if I make my bed in hell, you're right there with me, highest heights. Nowhere can we, if we go to outer space, the astronauts go out there, is God there? He's everywhere, right? Well, I'm going to border on theological, heretical thought, but I would contend that there's one place where God isn't. There's one place where God has given us freedom. And He's given us freedom. He encourages us to think on these things. But He doesn't make us. And we have the ability to create a place in our mind where God isn't. And that's the scariest place. That's basically hell. That's hell, to be where God isn't. For a lot of folks who are anticipating a future without God in it, they're thinking, what am I going to do? What if this happens? What if that happens? Is that time for me to wrap up? Okay, yeah, it is. So my thought is, if God is everywhere, but he's not in our creative world that we come up with, we anticipate something that's going to happen, and God's not there with us. So one of the things I encourage my clients, whatever your fearful thought is, bring Jesus right alongside you, because he's promised, I will never leave you. I'll never forsake you. That's all throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament. That's one of the most common responses, that God encourages us with. I'll never abandon you. There's nowhere you can go from my presence. You may not feel it because the part of your brain that's perceiving that isn't feeling it now, but he won't abandon you. And he's also promised that whatever you face, if it's real, his grace will be sufficient for you. But the thing is, there's no grace for the things we make up in our head. So that's where it's so scary. It's like, oh wait, if this is real, some of the most courageous and capable, confident people I know in real danger situations are anxious folks, because they've already been through this a million times. And when the danger hits, they are on it. And they're not anxious and they're not overwhelmed. It's paradoxical. In real settings, there's a grace that God gives us that we would not normally have. But when we create something in our minds, we create a space where God isn't. And then his grace can't be sufficient for us. Just another thought. Thank you all for your attentiveness.